Why was she so calm in a place where everyone else hurried? The terminal buzzed with the familiar rhythm of travel. Rolling suitcases rattled across the tiled floor. Voices layered over one another in a dozen conversations. A child cried in the distance, muffled quickly by a parent's soothing promise of snacks. The scent of burnt coffee hung in the air like a memory that no one wanted but everyone accepted. For most, it was just another ordinary afternoon in an American airport. The kind of place where thousands of separate lives crossed paths for an instant before scattering again. But Claire walked as though none of it touched her. She moved quietly without urgency, her jeans worn, her gray hoodie loose, her sneakers frayed at the edges. She wasn't dressed to impress but to disappear. Her carry-on bag was the same, practical, plain, efficient. Not stylish, not fragile. She carried it with the kind of ease that suggested habit, routine, like someone who had boarded more planes than she could ever count. And yet there was a subtle difference in the way she carried herself. A quiet poise, the kind that didn't invite attention but once noticed was impossible to ignore. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble with her boarding pass. She simply offered the attendant a polite nod and stepped down the jet bridge with measured steps, each one steady. The metallic thump beneath her feet, hollow, familiar, struck her chest with a memory she didn't want to carry. Years ago, that sound had meant something else entirely. Duty, responsibility, lives depending on her ability to hold steady when everything else shook. But today, it was only the sound of a walkway leading her to a seat in row 12. She inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower, as if to shake the weight of memory off her shoulders. The cabin was already filling. Overhead bins slammed shut, elbows bumped, and voices rose in irritation as families tried to fit too many bags into too little space. Claire slipped quietly into her aisle seat halfway down, row 12. She stowed her bag beneath the seat instead of fighting for overhead space and pulled her earbuds free. She didn't need much. She never did. Around her, the normal choreography of travel unfolded. A businessman across the aisle hammered away on his laptop as though racing against time. A college student in the window seat held her phone high, snapping selfies to prove she was in the sky even before the plane left the ground. Behind them, children negotiated with tired parents over tablets and snacks. To them, the flight was just an inconvenience to be endured. For Claire, it was something else. She leaned back. For once she welcomed anonymity. For once she wasn't in charge. No maps to study, no decisions to make, no one watching her, just another passenger among many, hood pulled low over her face, music filling her ears. The rhythm of flight, even commercial flight, had always been a strange comfort. A cocoon. A place where the world outside was reduced to clouds and sky, where time slowed and breathing steadied. The safety briefing began. Claire half listened. She knew every word by heart. Years ago, she had been the one explaining procedures. Only the cabins had been smaller, the passengers wearing helmets instead of headphones, and the stakes infinitely higher than a delayed vacation. She tugged her tight, instinctual, mechanical. Old reflexes never left. The engines roared. The aircraft surged forward. The pressure pressed her into the seat as the runway blurred beneath them. She closed her eyes and listened to the hum, the rise and fall of pitch, the subtle changes in thrust. For others, it was just noise. For her, it was information, the language of the machine itself. Balance, power, performance. Every tone told a story, but she reminded herself of the rule she had promised: not today. Today you are not a pilot. Today you are just a passenger. The plane lifted. The city shrank below. Buildings folded into a grid of light. Rivers shrank into silver threads. The sign chimed off and a restless murmur swept through the cabin as passengers settled in. Claire adjusted her hoodie, tilted her head, closed her eyes. Sleep pressed against her like a tide, and for once she let it take her. Time passed unnoticed. Carts rolled down aisles. Plastic cups of soda clinked against ice. A group of friends laughed 2 rows back. The businessman cursed under his breath at a missed keystroke. The world shrank into the small, predictable hum of flight. But while Claire drifted into light sleep, the cabin around her began to shift. Subtle, quiet. A change only a few noticed at first, flight attendants exchanging brief, clipped glances, the faintest tension in their movements, the kind of choreography that wasn't part of routine. Claire didn't notice at first. She stirred when a cart brushed by her elbow, but she slipped back into the cocoon of half-dream, until it came. The intercom crackled. "Ladies," and the captain's voice carried through the cabin, calm, steady, the way passengers expected, but beneath the steadiness was something else, an edge, a restraint pulled tight. "If there is a licensed pilot on board, please make yourself known to a member of the crew immediately." The cabin froze. Conversations cut mid-sentence. The businessman across the aisle lifted his eyes from his screen. A woman in row 11 turned sharply to her husband, whispering, "Did he say a pilot?" Confusion rippled like a wave. A request like that didn't belong here. Pilots belonged in the cockpit, not scattered among the rows of passengers. The captain repeated it, shorter this time, sharper. "If there are any licensed pilots on board, please ring your call button now." The tension that had hovered quietly now thickened, unmistakable. Flight attendants moved briskly, scanning the rows with eyes too sharp, too searching. Their smiles remained but thin, practiced calm that only highlighted their urgency. Claire's eyes opened, earbud dangling, heartbeat rising. She had heard right, not a doctor, not a nurse, not a paramedic, a pilot. Her breath caught, her chest tight. For a moment she stayed still, instincts telling her to watch, to measure, to wait. Years of training had drilled that into her. Assess before you act. But her mind was already racing. What could it mean? A medical emergency in the cockpit. A system failure too heavy for one person to manage. Either way, serious. Passengers whispered louder now. Is the plane in trouble? Maybe the captain's sick. Maybe it's a joke. But no one laughed. Claire's gaze followed the attendants as they crouched row by row, whispering to passengers. Some shook their heads. A man muttered, "I've flown once or twice." It wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. Her pulse quickened. She could stay silent, keep the hood over her face, pretend she was no one. That had been the plan, but the captain's voice returned now, the calm fraying. "I repeat, if there are any licensed pilots on this aircraft, please identify yourselves immediately." The words cut through her chest like a blade. She felt it physically, the weight of decision pressing against her ribs. She could remain hidden, or she could rise. Her earbuds coiled into her pocket, her breath steady. She looked at the aisle, at the approaching attendants scanning faces, asking quietly, "Do you have any flight experience?" Claire inhaled deeply. She knew what was coming. The world of row 12 was about to end. What does it take to stand up when no one else will? The flight attendant's voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency as she leaned over the seats. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you have any flight experience?" Claire's eyes lifted slowly. For a breath she hesitated. The hood of her sweatshirt shadowed her face, and for a single flicker of a moment she thought about saying no. About shrugging, letting the attendant move on, letting this crisis belong to someone else. But there was no one else. The captain had asked 3 times. The attendants had combed the rows. And with every second that passed, the quiet tension in the cabin thickened into fear. Her commander's voice rose from memory, sharp as if whispered directly into her ear. "When you're the one who can act, you don't wait for someone else." Claire nodded. Her voice came low but steady. "Yes, I do." The attendant blinked, clearly not expecting the answer. She leaned closer. "Are you a licensed pilot?" Claire's jaw set. She sat. "United States Air Force. 10 years flight time, multiple aircraft types. I'm currently certified." The attendant froze. Relief flooded her face so quickly she almost forgot to hide it. Then she leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Please stay here. I'll inform the captain immediately." The moment she stepped away, whispers erupted. "She's a pilot," a man hissed. "Military," someone else answered. Row 12, she said she's certified. The words rippled row by row, faster than any announcement. The businessman across the aisle stared at Claire with open disbelief, his laptop forgotten. The college student leaned so far forward he nearly pressed against the seat in front of him, eyes wide. "She's a pilot," he whispered, but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Claire sat motionless. Every eye that landed on her felt like a weight pressing against her shoulders. She had been under scrutiny before, interrogations, briefings, missions where her judgment meant lives, but this felt different. These weren't soldiers or commanders watching her. These were strangers, mothers clutching children, families holding their breath, people desperate for her to be what she claimed. The intercom chimed. The captain's voice came again, almost clipped. "Cabin crew, prepare for briefing." Moments later, the same attendant returned, her composure brittle but intact. She crouched at Claire's seat, speaking softly. "The captain needs you in the cockpit. Immediately." Claire didn't hesitate. She unbuckled her in one fluid motion and rose. For a second the hood still hung low over her face. Then she tugged it back. Shoulders squared, stride firm, she stepped into the aisle. The whispers followed her, not mocking, not doubting, hopeful, awed, a mix of fear and reverence. "She's going up there. God help us, she's the one." The aisle seemed longer than ever. Each row she passed was a wall of faces turned toward her, their eyes silently begging her to be enough. She kept her gaze forward. Each step was deliberate, steady. By the time she reached the front, she had shifted completely into the rhythm she knew too well: mission mode. The attendant at the cockpit door gave her a quick scan, then nodded. Claire returned the look with a silent signal of confidence. The door unlocked with a click. As it opened, the world shifted. The cockpit smelled of warm electronics and recycled air. A low hum of instruments blended with the steady thrum of the engines. Screens glowed in amber and green, casting light across tense faces. The captain sat hunched, both hands gripping the yoke, his knuckles white with strain. His eyes darted to her, wide with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Beside him, the co-pilot slumped against the seat, oxygen mask pressed to his face, chest rising and falling unevenly. Alive but useless. "Thank God," the captain breathed. His voice cracked under the pressure he had been carrying alone. "They said you're certified." "Yes," Claire answered firmly. Sliding into the empty seat, she adjusted her headset with practiced ease. "United States Air Force, F-16s, C-130s. I've logged hours on civilian systems as well. I can help." The captain exhaled sharply, his shoulders dropping an inch as if a crushing weight had been lifted. "Co-pilot collapsed 20 minutes ago. Cardiac, maybe. I've been holding steady on autopilot, but with weather ahead and medical issues in the cabin, I can't juggle both." Claire scanned the instruments. Altitude stable. Autopilot engaged. Crosswinds pushing slight deviations. Nothing catastrophic, not yet. But strain was visible in every detail. The flicker of the captain's hand, the exhaustion in his voice, the storm swelling ahead on the radar. She nodded once. "Has medical been arranged for him?" "Yes, crew's managing, but he's out for now." "Then we divert," she said without hesitation. The captain rattled off the nearest alternate. Without pause, Claire seized the radio. "Center, this is Flight 482, declaring an medical emergency. Request immediate vectors to alternate." Her voice cut through the frequency, sharp, calm, professional. Not the panicked tones of a desperate crew, but the cadence of someone who had done this before. Air traffic control responded instantly, their clipped efficiency signaling respect. As she relayed settings, her hands moved across the panel instinctively, muscle memory returning like a tide. Switches, dials, headings, autopilot adjustments. The rhythm was alive again. The captain glanced sideways at her, disbelief softening into trust. "You weren't listed as crew." "I was." She flicked a dial, eyes on the horizon. "Row 12. His laugh was brief, humorless but grateful. Hell of a day to change your mind. Claire allowed herself the smallest smile. Maybe. But behind her calm, her chest tightened. She hadn't told him everything. Not about why she'd left the Air Force. Not about the accident, the loss, the night she swore she would never sit in this seat again. The intercom buzzed. A flight attendant's voice cracked through. "Captain, passengers are asking questions. Do we make an announcement?" The captain reached for the handset, but Claire stopped him with a touch to his arm. "I'll do it." He blinked, then nodded. She lifted the handset, pressed the button. The cabin hushed on the other side, 200 strangers holding their breath. "This is Claire speaking," she began, her voice steady, low, deliberate. "Some of you saw me leave row 12. I am a licensed military pilot and I am assisting the captain. We do have a medical situation on board, but the aircraft is under full control. We will be diverting to the nearest airport and everything is being managed. Please remain calm and follow the crew's instructions." Silence followed for a heartbeat. Then a soft murmur of relief spread row by row. The businessman slumped back in his seat, whispering something like a prayer. The college student repeated it under his breath. "She really is a pilot." Mothers hushed children with gentler voices. Strangers exchanged looks of cautious hope. Claire set the handset down. The captain gave her a long, searching look. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. But her thoughts screamed what her voice did not, and it cost me more than you'll ever know. The aircraft shuddered slightly as turbulence struck. Claire steadied herself, eyes flicking across instruments, her voice calm, precise. "Altitude steady, holding course." The captain exhaled, hands easing on the yoke. For the first time since the crisis began, he wasn't alone. And for Claire, for the first time in years, the skis had claimed her back. What happens when the past you tried to bury suddenly comes alive again? The cockpit hummed with noise, instruments beeping, radios crackling, engines droning like an unrelenting heartbeat. To the untrained ear it was chaos. To Claire it was a language. She read it the way others read words on a page. Altitude steady. Airspeed fluctuating slightly in crosswinds. Autopilot correcting but struggling against the turbulence brewing ahead. She leaned forward, eyes flicking across the displays with the precision of someone who had done this thousands of times. Her voice dropped into the clipped, professional cadence of a pilot in rhythm. "Speed steady at 250. Holding altitude 29,000. The captain nodded, his shoulders loosening slightly as if her words anchored him. He had been alone in this storm of responsibility for 20 minutes, one man juggling a two-person job with 200 lives in the cabin behind him. Now, for the first time, he could breathe. "Feels like I've got my right hand back," he muttered. Claire didn't answer with words. She simply reached across the panel, adjusted a setting, confirmed the vector from air traffic control, and returned her gaze to the horizon. That was answer enough. But inside something stirred, a weight pressing against her chest. It wasn't fear, not exactly, it was memory. A flicker of nights spent in cockpits far smaller than this one. The sharp crackle of comms, the scream of warning alarms, the sickening silence of a wingman who never answered again. She swallowed it down. This wasn't the time. She had promised herself she was done reliving it, promised she had walked away. And yet here she was, headset snug, fingers moving like she had never left. The aircraft jolted, dropping 100 feet in a pocket of air. Gasps rippled faintly from the cabin. The captain cursed under his breath, gripping the yoke. Claire steadied him with her voice, correcting, "Back on glide, ride it out." Her tone was calm, commanding without being forceful. The captain responded instantly, adjusting trim, correcting course. He glanced sideways at her, eyes flicking with something like admiration. "You've flown heavies before." "C-130s," she answered, eyes never leaving the instruments. "Different handling, same principles." The captain gave a low whistle. "Fighters too, right? You don't sound like someone new to this." Claire's lips pressed into the faintest smile. I've seen my share of storms. But she didn't say the rest. She didn't tell him about the night the sky had turned against her, about the mission that still woke her in a sweat, her hands trembling from the memory of fire, metal, silence, about the face she couldn't save, the voice she never heard again. That was the night she told herself she was done. Done risking lives. Done carrying the weight of the sky. The storm outside rumbled, lightning flashing in the distance. Claire forced her breathing steady. The present demanded her attention. The past could wait. The radio crackled. Flight 482, descend and maintain flight level 240. Expect vectors for approach in 15. Claire keyed the mic. Her voice was steady, precise. Flight 482, roger. Descend and maintain 240. Vectors in 15. She adjusted the autopilot dial smoothly. The aircraft responded with a gentle dip. Passengers in the cabin would feel it only as a shift in gravity, a slight press into their seats. Nothing dramatic, nothing to give away the storm rising ahead. But Claire could already see it on the radar. Clusters of green, yellow, angry red blooming like wounds across the screen. The weather wasn't letting them slip through quietly. Storm cell forming south of our path, she noted. We'll skirt the edge, but if it grows, we'll need a 5-degree correction north. The captain shot her a quick glance. His eyes held strain but also trust. You've done this before. More times than I can count, she said softly. And it was true. Storms, combat zones, nights when the sky itself tried to kill her. But what lingered wasn't the adrenaline. It was the memory of failure. One night, one mission, one loss that never let go. She tightened her grip on the armrest for just a second, grounding herself. Then she released it. The intercom chimed. A flight attendant's voice came through, brittle at the edges. Captain, passengers are asking for updates. Should we address them again? The captain hesitated. His eyes flicked to Claire. She nodded once. I'll take it. The handset felt warm in her hand. She pressed the button, her voice carrying into the cabin. Ladies, and this is Claire again. We are descending toward our alternate airport. Conditions ahead are being monitored carefully. The captain and I are working together, and the aircraft is under full control. Please keep your fastened and trust that everything is being managed. Her tone was calm, measured, certain. It wasn't what she said that mattered most, it was how she said it. In row 12, her now empty seat stood like a silent symbol. Passengers looked toward it, then toward the cockpit door, and the tension shifted. Fear softened into something else. Belief. She sounds calm, a woman whispered to her. She knows what she's doing, another replied. She said Air Force. That means she's the real thing. Even the children felt the change. Where earlier they had cried, now they sat quieter, sensing the adults around them were steadier. In the cockpit, Claire replaced the handset and returned her focus to the instruments. The captain's eyes lingered on her. You've got the kind of voice that makes people believe, he said quietly. Claire didn't answer, because she knew the truth. Voices could lie. Hers had once sounded steady on nights when inside she was breaking. Confidence wasn't always courage. Sometimes it was survival. The turbulence thickened. The aircraft shuddered harder, rain beginning to lash the windshield in streaks. The wipers swiped back and forth, barely keeping up. Claire steadied her tone. Turbulence moderate, maintain course, trust the instruments. The captain nodded, jaw tight. His breathing shallow, shoulders hunched. Claire saw the strain in him, not just physical but mental, the weight of command, the fear of faltering. She recognized it because she had lived it. Her voice softened. Breathe, let the plane fly, don't fight her too much. He exhaled just as she said it, shoulders loosening. The plane steadied, not because the storm relented, but because his control returned. In the cabin, passengers felt every bump. They clutched armrests, whispered prayers, but many remembered her voice, remembered the way she had sounded certain when everything else felt uncertain. That certainty was holding them together now. Claire's eyes flicked to the altimeter, descending through 14,000, speed within limits. The captain gave her a sidelong glance. I have to ask, why row 12? Why not still in the cockpit day after day? Her fingers hovered over the throttle, adjusting slightly. Her eyes stayed forward. Sometimes the sky takes more than it gives back, she said quietly. He didn't press. He didn't need to. The weight of her answer hung heavy enough. The radio crackled again. Flight 482, turn left heading 255, descend to 6,000. Expect vectors for final. Claire acknowledged, her voice crisp, then turned back to the captain. Vectors are clear. We'll be stable on 27. The rain thickened, hammering the fuselage like fists. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the cockpit in stark flashes of white. Inside, Claire's calm voice anchored everything. Corrections, checklists, a rhythm, a team. And though she had boarded the plane hopping to disappear, hopping to be no one, she realized now there was no hiding from the truth. She wasn't just the woman in row 12 anymore. She was a pilot again. And whether she wanted it or not, the sky had claimed her back. How much can one person carry before the weight breaks them? The storm thickened into a living wall, hammering the fuselage with rain that sounded like fists on steel. Lightning strobed across the cockpit windows, each flash carving Claire's face in sharp relief, steady eyes, taut jaw, lips pressed into a thin line of focus. The descent was no longer routine. Every second demanded correction. The autopilot struggled, compensating for gusts that shoved the aircraft off course. The captain's grip on the yoke was iron, his breath shallow, sharp. Wind's variable 12 knots, Claire called out, her eyes flicking between instruments. Crosswind drift right. Correct with rudder small input. That's it. Hold her steady. The captain obeyed, but sweat streaked his temples. His nerves twitched at every jolt. Alone, he might have cracked. With Claire's voice steady beside him, he found rhythm again. Air traffic control crackled through the headset. Flight 482, turn right heading 240, descend to 3000. Cleared for ILS approach, runway 36. Claire responded instantly, crisp and confident. 240, 3000. Cleared ILS 36, flight 482. Her hands adjusted autopilot dials with practiced precision. The captain risked a glance at her. The calm in her voice was contagious. You've done this 1,000 times, haven't you? More than that, she said softly, her eyes locked on the horizon line. But it never feels routine. Outside, thunder cracked like artillery fire. The aircraft jolted downward in a violent downdraft, dropping hundreds of feet in seconds. Gasps erupted in the cabin, muffled by clutched hands and whispered prayers. Claire didn't flinch. Her voice cut through the chaos like steel, correcting, back on glide slope, trust your instruments. Her left hand steadied the throttle, her right hand light on the yoke beside the captain, not taking it from him, but grounding him. Silent reassurance. The storm rattled the cabin again, harder this time. Passengers gripped armrests, some with eyes squeezed shut, others staring toward the cockpit door as though looking for answers they couldn't see. But they remembered her voice, remembered how calm she sounded when everything else felt fragile. In row 12, her empty seat was more than empty now. It was a symbol, proof that sometimes the one you least expected was the one you needed most. Back in the cockpit, Claire leaned forward, scanning the weather radar. Red cells pulsed like warnings across the screen. Storm's tightening, she said, her tone clipped. Vectors are still clean, but we'll need active corrections. The captain nodded quickly, his hands shaking slightly on the yoke. Claire noticed. Breathe, she said again, low, firm. Don't fight her, guide her. He exhaled, shoulders loosened, the plane steadied. Claire's gaze lingered on him a moment longer. She knew that look, the edge of collapse. She had seen it in her wingmen. She had felt it in herself. the weight of command crushing until the only thing left was fear. And fear in the cockpit was poison. Her thoughts flicked back unbidden to another storm, another night, another cockpit. The alarms had screamed. The horizon had spun. Her wingman's voice had cut through the comms, sharp, panicked, then silence. She had fought the aircraft through a black sky, her own hands trembling, her own chest burning with the knowledge that one wrong move meant both of them would vanish into fire. But only one voice had gone silent that night. Claire blinked hard, forcing the memory back down where it belonged. Not now, focus. Altitude 3000, she called, her voice steady once more. Glide path captured, flaps 15. The captain moved, executing the input, his motions automatic but slowed by fatigue. Claire backed him with her own eyes, checking, correcting, guiding. Their rhythm had become seamless, as though they had flown together for years. Feels like I've got a co-pilot again, he muttered. Claire's lips curved faintly. That's what I'm here for. But the words pressed heavy inside her, because she knew the truth. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had boarded this flight to disappear, to be no one. Yet here she was, headset snug, voice clipped, hands guiding a storm. The very identity she had sworn to bury was alive again. The radio crackled. Flight 482, you're cleared to continue approach. Winds at surface variable, light rain reported. Claire acknowledged, then glanced at the captain. We'll have crosswinds, but within limits, nothing we can't handle. His laugh was short, almost disbelieving. You sound like you've said that before. Too many times. Rain streaked harder across the windshield, wipers working furiously. The runway still invisible, swallowed by the storm. Keep your scan up, she told him. Trust your instruments. Runway will appear at 1000. He nodded, breathing shallow but steady. Her words anchored him again. Inside the cabin, turbulence shook drinks from tray tables, rattled overhead bins. Children whimpered. Strangers clutched each other's hands. But over it all, Claire's earlier announcement replayed in their minds. The aircraft is under full control. Her voice had become their lifeline. In the cockpit, Claire's tone sharpened. Flaps 25, speed steady, glide slope captured. The captain, his hands trembling less now, steadied by her presence. You've got a natural commander's tone, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Not command, she corrected quietly, just survival. The storm roared louder, the fuselage shuddering as gusts buffeted them sideways. Warning tones flickered briefly, drift alerts. Claire's hand shot to the rudder pedals, applying pressure, correcting. Don't chase it, she ordered. Small inputs, that's it, hold her steady. The plane responded, leveling back onto center line. The captain exhaled a shaky laugh. You make it sound easy. Claire didn't answer, because she knew the truth. It was never easy. Not in combat, not in storms, not when lives hung like glass between survival and disaster. The calm was an act, a mask worn so that others didn't see the fracture lines underneath. Her gaze flicked to the altimeter. 1000, she called. Runway in sight any moment. Stay focused. The captain's eyes darted forward, scanning through the sheets of rain. Nothing yet. His jaw clenched. Claire's voice firmed, louder, sharper. Trust your instruments. The runway is there. Don't look for it until it shows. Hold her steady. He obeyed. The plane rode the storm like a wounded bird, trembling but holding its line. Then faint at first, two white lights pierced through the rain. Faint, blurred but real. Runway in sight, Claire confirmed, her tone clipped with relief. Continue. The captain's eyes locked on the lights, his breath quickening. The ground was rushing closer now. Claire's cadence sharpened. 300, flaps full, speed steady, correct drift left. Good, hold. The alarms threatened again as crosswinds pushed. The nose drifted. Claire's hand shot to the controls, nudging rudder and throttle, her touch precise. Small corrections. Don't fight the storm, guide through it. That's it. Hold. The ground rose fast. The runway lights glowed brighter through rain. 100 feet, Claire called. Her voice was steel now. Flare at 50, trust the process. You've got this. The captain swallowed hard, sweat dripping, knuckles white. You've got this, she repeated, her voice cutting through his fear like a blade. 50. The captain pulled gently. The nose lifted. The massive body of the jet hovered for a breath, suspended between sky and earth. Then contact. A heavy thud reverberated as the wheels struck wet asphalt, water spraying in twin streams. The plane bounced once, then settled. Reverse thrust, Claire commanded, her hand guiding. The engines roared in reverse. The plane rattled, slowing, fighting the slick runway. 70 knots, 50-30, Claire called. We're safe. The aircraft rolled to a crawl. Engines eased down. The storm still hammered outside, but inside the cockpit, silence filled the space where fear had lived. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the cabin erupted. Applause swelled, hesitant at first, then thunderous, rising row by row until the narrow cabin shook with clapping, cheers, and tears. The captain slumped back in his seat, trembling. His voice cracked. If you hadn't been here. Claire cut him off, her voice low. We were both here, that's what matters. But inside, she knew. If she hadn't stood in row 12, this plane, this storm, this night might have ended very differently. She pulled off her headset, the adrenaline ebbing, exhaustion rushing in its place. Her hands, so steady before, trembled now in her lap. The storm outside still raged, but for the 200 souls on board, the storm had already passed. What do you do after you've carried strangers through a storm, then return to being just another face in the crowd? The engines wound down to a low hum as Flight 482 rolled across the rain-slicked tarmac. Outside, the storm still lashed the fuselage with sheets of water, but inside the aircraft there was a quiet unlike anything that had existed an hour earlier. The fear, the whispers, the desperate glances toward the cockpit, all of it had given way to stunned relief. For a moment no one moved. Passengers sat frozen, as though afraid that even shifting in their seats might undo the miracle that had just occurred. Then slowly, hesitantly, hands began to clap. It started in row 8. A man stood awkwardly, his palms coming together in shaky rhythm. A woman joined him. Then another. Within seconds, the entire cabin was alive with applause, not polite, not routine, but raw, thunderous, rising with tears and laughter tangled together. The sound carried forward to the cockpit, echoing faintly through the closed door. The captain sat slumped in his seat, his hands trembling now that the danger had passed. His chest rose and fell heavily, each breath dragged from exhaustion. He turned his head toward Claire, his eyes wet with something between gratitude and disbelief. You saved this flight, he said hoarsely, his voice cracked, unpolished. If you hadn't been here. Claire shook her head, cutting him off gently. We saved it together. The captain opened his mouth to argue, but her tone left no room. She wasn't the kind to claim glory. He could see that now. She wasn't someone who stepped forward for applause. She had stepped forward because she had no other choice. Behind them the intercom chimed. A flight attendant's voice, soft and wavering, came through. Captain, the passengers, they're applauding. They know something happened. They don't know details, but they know. The captain's eyes flicked toward Claire, then back to the glowing instruments, now calm and steady. They deserve to know who you are, he said quietly. Claire's gaze stayed on the windshield, where raindrops streaked in silver lines under the runway lights. That's not why I stepped forward, she murmured. They don't need to remember me. They just need to remember they made it home tonight. The words struck him silent, not pride, not bravado, something rarer. Humility forged in fire, a purpose that didn't seek recognition. The aircraft came to a stop at the gate. Outside, ground crews swarmed in rain-slick jackets, their reflective strips glowing under floodlights. Paramedics stood ready with a stretcher, summoned earlier for the co-pilot still unconscious in his seat. The cockpit door opened. A medic's voice cut through briskly. "We've got him." They eased the co-pilot out, masks and tubes hissing softly, their efficiency a quiet counterpoint to the storm outside. Claire rose, her body aching with the weight of adrenaline drained away. She slipped her jacket back over her shoulders, movements calm, unhurried. The captain watched her with disbelief. "You're just going to walk out?" he asked, incredulous. Claire paused, her hand on the edge of the seat. She looked at him steadily, her voice even. "That's what passengers do." And with that, she turned and stepped into the aisle. The cabin hushed instantly. Every face turned toward her. Mothers, fathers, children with wide eyes, strangers who had shared fear and now shared relief. They watched her like someone stepping down from a place above them, someone who had carried them through darkness into light. A murmur spread, whispers darting like sparks. "That's her. She's the one. The woman from row 12. As she moved down the narrow aisle, the murmurs grew into something else. Applause. Louder now, more insistent, rolling forward until the sound engulfed the cabin. People rose to their feet, tears streaming, hands pounding together in a rhythm that felt less like celebration and more like reverence. Claire felt it with every step. The gratitude, the awe, the disbelief. She nodded politely at those who reached for her, a faint smile on her lips, but she did not bask in it. She did not slow. Her humility held firm. For her, the storm was already over. Her duty had ended the moment the wheels touched the ground. Near the forward galley, the lead flight attendant reached for her arm, her eyes glistening. "Ma'am," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I've worked 100 flights, but I'll never forget this one. Thank you." Claire squeezed her hand gently. "Take care of them, that's what matters." The attendant's breath caught, but she nodded quickly. The forward door opened. Damp, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and wet tarmac. The storm still grumbled above, clouds fractured by streaks of lightning, but in the distance, faint slivers of stars shone through. Claire stepped into the jet bridge. The applause still thundered behind her, echoing faintly down the narrow corridor. Passengers craned their necks, trying to glimpse her one last time before she vanished. Some called quiet thank yous, some simply stared. But Claire kept walking. The terminal ahead buzzed with life, waiting families, anxious staff, airport announcements echoing across high ceilings. To them, she was just another traveler emerging late from a storm-battered flight, hoodie damp from the rain, carry-on slung over one shoulder, nothing extraordinary. The captain caught up to her just before she melted into the crowd. His voice was firmer now, steadier, though still heavy with the weight of what had passed. "Claire, I don't know if I'll ever see you again, but I'll never forget tonight." She turned to face him, meeting his eyes with quiet sincerity. "You don't need to remember me. Just remember what you're capable of when it matters most." And then she walked on. No fanfare, no spotlight, just another figure slipping into anonymity as though the storm had been nothing more than a passing shadow. But those who had seen her, the crew, the captain, the 200 strangers whose lives had hung in the balance, would remember. They would carry the story into living rooms, into quiet conversations, into memories that refused to fade. She was asleep in row 12 when the captain asked if any pilots were on board, and she had stood. Now, as she pushed through the terminal doors into the cool night air, Claire inhaled deeply. The smell of wet concrete grounded her, pulling her back into herself. Taxis idled at the curb, drivers watching for fares. But Claire walked past them, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Every step away from the airport was a step back into the quiet she preferred. She wasn't seeking recognition. She wasn't chasing headlines. She wasn't even thinking of the gratitude that had followed her down the aisle. What she carried with her was quieter, heavier. The knowledge that when fate demanded, she had answered. That when the skis called, she had risen not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't do anything else. And though she tried to walk back into anonymity, she knew a truth that would follow her forever. Storms would always come. In skis, in lives, in unexpected hours when courage was tested. She did not fear them, because she was and would always be a pilot. What happens when the sky reminds you of the part of yourself you tried to bury? The night air outside the terminal was sharp and damp, washed clean by rain. Claire walked alone, boots splashing through shallow puddles, the noise of the airport fading behind her with every step. Taxis idled in a neat line, drivers calling softly for fares. She ignored them, choosing distance, choosing silence. Her carry-on bag hung from her shoulder, light but heavy in meaning. She had packed it for an ordinary trip, not for the weight of 200 lives. And yet, that was what it had carried. She crossed a stretch of wet pavement until the sounds of engines and voices thinned. Only the storm remained, rumbling faintly across the horizon like a memory unwilling to die. Claire stopped under the dim glow of a streetlight, her breath misting faintly in the cool air. For a long moment she stood still. She could still feel the headset pressing against her ears, still hear the clipped urgency of air traffic control, still see the blur of runway lights through rain. She could still hear her own voice, calm, steady, certain. It wasn't the sound of the storm that unsettled her. It was the silence afterward. That silence had weight. It carried ghosts. She closed her eyes, and memory clawed its way forward, unbidden. Another cockpit, another storm, but not rain, not turbulence. Enemy fire streaking through the sky like angry sparks. A voice crackling in her headset, panicked, breaking, younger than it should have sounded. Her wingman. "Mayday, mayday, I'm hit." Then static. Then silence. Her chest tightened, her throat closing as though reliving the moment could steal her breath all over again. She remembered screaming his call sign into the void, her hands trembling on the controls, her eyes burning as the sky swallowed him. That was the night she told herself she was done. Done with skis, done with storms, done with responsibility that weighed more than her own life ever could. And yet, tonight in row 12 she had felt it return, the shift, the rhythm, the command sliding back into her bones as though it had never left. The headset, the checklist cadence, the storm, the responsibility. The part of herself she had buried had clawed its way back to the surface. Her hands trembled now in the quiet, trembled the way they hadn't in the cockpit, because in the cockpit she couldn't allow it. Up there she had been steel, down here she was flesh again. Claire sank onto a bench outside the terminal, the metal slick with rain. She set her bag at her feet and pressed her elbows to her knees, head bowed. The storm grumbled faintly in the distance, but her storm was louder, inside, in memory, in guilt. Her commander's words echoed, as sharp now as they had been in training. When you're the one who can act, you don't wait for someone else. But what they hadn't told her was what came after. The cost, the nights awake, the faces that never left, the silence that returned when the storm was over and everyone else had moved on. She rubbed her hands together, grounding herself. They still smelled faintly of the cockpit, metal, plastic, recycled air. She had thought she would never smell it again. She had promised herself she wouldn't. And yet fate had dragged her back, not into combat, not into war, but into responsibility all the same. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. She knew what it would be, a message from Washington or a fellow trainer or someone who would eventually hear whispers about what happened tonight. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, she listened. To the silence. To the faint applause that still echoed in her ears though it had ended long ago. To the captain's voice, cracking with gratitude. To the passengers' whispers, "She's the one, the woman from row 12. And beneath all of that, her wingman's last transmission, the one she had never stopped hearing. Her jaw clenched. She wanted to shake it away, but memory clings like rain to steel. Her mind replayed the final seconds of the landing again and again, Not because she doubted it, but because that was what memory did. The flare at 50 feet, the thud of the wheels, the roar of reverse thrust, the applause. And the truth pressed heavier with each replay. She had been alive in that cockpit. Not alive in the way most people were. Not alive like sitting in row 12 with earbuds and a hoodie. No, alive in the way only the sky had ever made her. Awake, present, certain. And that terrified her, because she had sworn she didn't want that anymore. Her breath caught. She leaned back on the bench, staring up at the fractured sky where faint stars broke through clouds. Maybe the sky wasn't done with her. The thought chilled her more than the rain. She tilted her head back, eyes closing. For a moment she allowed herself to feel it, the ache of loss, the exhaustion of survival, the strange relief of purpose rediscovered. Was this who she truly was? Not the woman who slipped quietly through terminals, invisible in the crowd. Not the trainer in Washington, teaching procedures in safe conference rooms. But the pilot, the one who rose when called, the one who steadied storms. And if that was true, what did it mean for the life she had tried to build in silence? Her phone buzzed again. This time she pulled it free. The screen lit her face in pale blue, a text from a name she hadn't seen in months. Washington Ops, heard about the diversion, need to talk. Claire's stomach turned. Of course the whispers had already reached them. Of course someone, somewhere, had connected her name to Flight 482. She locked the phone without replying. She wasn't ready. Not for them. Not for questions. Not for the possibility that tonight hadn't just been a storm to survive, but a door opening. A call back to a life she thought she had left behind. Her gaze drifted back to the sky, to the faint glow of stars behind breaking clouds. Storms would always come. She knew that now more than ever. But what unsettled her wasn't the storm itself. It was that tonight had reminded her storms had always been where she belonged. What happens when the life you thought you buried comes knocking on your door? The hotel lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. Claire moved through it quietly, her damp hoodie clinging to her shoulders, her carry-on dragging behind her. No one looked at her twice. To them, she was just another traveler coming off a late, storm-beaten flight. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The desk clerk slid her a without recognition, and she took the elevator alone. The soft hum of the machinery and the flickering fluorescent light felt strangely loud after the silence of the terminal bench outside. When she stepped into her room, the quiet was immediate, thick. She dropped her bag by the door, peeled the hoodie off, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands still trembled faintly, though not from cold. It wasn't the storm outside that lingered. It was the storm inside. She leaned forward, pressing her palms into her eyes until color pulsed behind them. The landing replayed again. The captain's voice. The applause. The way her hands had known exactly what to do, as though the years away hadn't happened. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Same sender. Washington Ops, we need to debrief. Call immediately. She didn't move, just stared at the words until they blurred. Washington, always watching, always waiting. They had let her go quietly when she asked, had respected her silence, but they hadn't forgotten her. Men and women like Claire weren't easy to forget. She silenced the phone and set it face down. For a moment the quiet returned. Then a knock at the door. Her chest tightened, not loud, not urgent, 3 steady raps. She rose slowly, crossing the room with deliberate steps. She checked the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, suit, tie loosened, rain still glistening on his shoulders. He didn't look like hotel staff. Her stomach sank. She opened the door, just enough to see him clearly. "Major," he said softly, using the rank she hadn't worn in years. His voice was calm, respectful, but edged with purpose. "It's been a while." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Not long enough." "May I come in?" "No." The man didn't flinch. Then I'll stand here, but we need to talk. Claire exhaled sharply, stepped aside and let him in. He moved with quiet confidence, setting a leather folder on the small table by the window. He didn't sit until she did. Rain pattered softly against the glass, a metronome to their silence. Finally Claire spoke. You people move fast. You diverted a commercial jet through a storm and landed it after the first officer collapsed, the man replied evenly. That kind of thing doesn't stay quiet. Claire leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I didn't do it for you. I know. He opened the folder. Inside were printed reports, radar images, even a grainy photo of her stepping into the cockpit. You did it because you couldn't not do it, because that's who you are. Her jaw clenched. That's who I was. The man's gaze held hers. With respect, Major, tonight proves otherwise. Claire looked away, her eyes drawn to the rain streaking down the window. I left for a reason. We know, we respected that. He paused. But the world doesn't stop needing people like you because you walk away. His words landed heavy. She hated that part of her agreed with him. The man slid a single sheet across the table, an image, a satellite photo, grainy but unmistakable, a convoy, armored vehicles, remote terrain. We're stretched thin, he said quietly, too thin, and there are places where only certain hands can steady the storm. Claire didn't touch the photo. She didn't need to. The implication was clear. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not your solution anymore. Maybe not, he said, but maybe you are. Silence stretched between them. Claire rose abruptly, packing to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, damp hair clinging to her face, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but still sharp, still alive in a way she hadn't let herself be in years. You think I want to go back, she said, her voice low, that I miss it. The man didn't answer immediately. I think you miss being who you are when the storm rises. Her chest tightened, because that was the truth she hadn't dared admit, not to herself, not until tonight. She turned back to him, her voice edged with anger. Do you have any idea what it cost me, what it still costs me? Nights that don't end, faces I'll never forget, the silence after comms go dead. You think I can just step back in like none of that happened? His eyes softened, but his tone stayed firm. No, I think you carry it with you no matter where you go, even row 12. Claire froze. The words hit harder than she expected. Because he was right. Row 12 hadn't saved her. It had reminded her. She sank back into the chair, her hands clasped tightly as though holding herself together. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the rain filled the silence. Finally, Claire's voice broke it, soft, almost a whisper. I'm tired of being the one who has to rise. The man closed the folder gently. Then maybe it's not about rising anymore. Maybe it's about deciding what you do when you're already standing. Her eyes flicked to the photo again, then away. She hated that her pulse quickened at the sight, that the thought of stepping back into the storm made her feel something other than dread. Alive. The man stood, smoothing his jacket. Think about it, he said quietly. We'll be in touch. At the door he paused. His voice softened just enough to feel human. What you did tonight, it reminded people that not all storms end in loss. That matters. Then he was gone. Claire sat alone again, the room heavy with silence. The folder still lay on the table, the photo inside glinting faintly under the lamp. She didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, she leaned back, closing her eyes, hearing again the roar of the storm, the captain's trembling breath, the applause of 200 strangers. And underneath it all, her wingman's voice, the one that never came back. Her heart ached, her hands trembled, and somewhere deep inside, a question she had buried for years rose to the surface. What if the sky wasn't finished with her? What does it mean to walk away when the sky keeps calling you back? The rain eased by morning. Light seeped through the thin hotel curtains, soft but relentless, like a truth that refused to be hidden. Claire sat at the small table, untouched coffee cooling at her side. The folder the man had left lay open before her. She hadn't meant to open it. She had told herself she wouldn't. Yet sometime in the hours between midnight and dawn, her hand had moved on its own. Now the images stared up at her. Satellite photos, coordinates, a red circle around a patch of barren terrain that looked like nowhere, but she knew better. Nowhere always meant somewhere. Somewhere where lives dangled by threads. Somewhere where storms waited. Her eyes lingered on one photo longer than the rest. A convoy of vehicles, grainy outlines barely visible. To anyone else, just shapes. To her, a story, a risk, a storm she understood instinctively. She exhaled, closing the folder. The sound was final, like a door shutting. But inside, nothing felt final. Her hands curled into fists on the table. They still remembered last night. The weight of the yoke, the way the aircraft responded, the rhythm of command sliding back into her bones as though it had never left. She hated that her body remembered before her mind allowed it. Hated that her pulse quickened, not at the thought of fear, but of purpose. And she hated most of all that she had felt alive again. Her reflection in the window caught her eye, dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped. But behind the exhaustion there was something else. The faint, unyielding sharpness she had tried to bury. The pilot, the soldier, the one who rose when storms broke. Her phone buzzed again. Same sender, no new words, just 3 dots like someone waiting, watching. Claire silenced it, setting it face down. She couldn't let them decide for her. She stood, packing to the window. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The sky was pale, washed clean. Planes lifted in the distance, streaks of silver against the morning. Passengers were boarding. Pilots were climbing into cockpits. The world was moving forward as though last night had never happened. But for 200 people it had. They would never forget the woman in row 12 who stood when no one else could. They didn't know her name. They didn't need to. What mattered was that, in the moment it counted, someone had answered. Claire pressed her palm against the cold glass. She remembered their faces, the mother clutching her child, the man whispering prayers, the passengers whose applause had followed her down the aisle. They hadn't seen a soldier. They hadn't seen a pilot. They had seen something simpler, someone who refused to let fear win. And maybe that was all she needed to be. Her eyes drifted shut, her breath steadying. She didn't know if she would answer Washington's call. She didn't know if she was ready to step back into a world of orders, of missions, of silence and ghosts. But she knew this: storms would always come, some in the sky, some in the soul, and when they did, someone had to steady them. Maybe that would be her again, maybe not. She turned from the window, pulled on her jacket, and picked up her bag. She left the folder where it lay, closed but not forgotten. In the hallway, her steps echoed softly. In the lobby, no one looked at her twice, just another traveler moving on. At the doors, she paused. The morning air waited, fresh and cool, the storm behind her, the day ahead. She stepped outside. The city moved around her, taxis honking, people rushing, planes lifting into the sky. Life continued, ordinary, fragile, precious. Claire walked into it without fanfare. No medals, no headlines, just the quiet dignity of someone who had done what was needed and asked for nothing in return. Her reflection disappeared into the crowd, but the memory of her would remain, carried in the hearts of those she had saved. And if the skis called again, if another storm demanded her steadiness, she knew she would rise, not because she wanted recognition, not because she sought redemption, but because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.